Welcome everyone to another edition of Knicks Buzz, and I'm really excited to have my friends with me again. Welcome EJ, MARC BERMAN. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me again, guys. It's almost over, unfortunately.
Yep. EJ, how you doing?
Doing great. I mean, this is the end of another Knicks season. I guess we're gonna have to wait another year for a possible chance at the chip. But just happy to be here on here with you guys, CT and Mark. So it's a pleasure again.
Yeah, likewise. Yep, ready to get into it. Without further ado, um, let's start with the latest. Mark, the Knicks made things interesting, winning four straight as well, as capped off by a big win against the Chicago Bulls. As we're recording last night, went down to the Charlotte Hornets as well, amidst a lot of drama. We all saw the end of the game against the Chicago Bulls. Rumors were swirling about the future of Julius Randle as well. What can you tell us about the latest situation and him going on record, I think last night, and denying those claims?
Yeah, I mean, after the game, most of the questions to Julius Randle revolved about his unhappiness or happiness, his willingness to be part of this for the long term. And he said, basically, my answer hasn't changed. I still want to be here. I still love New York. He made some interesting comments, I have to say, and some touching comments. And I hope fans can lay off him a little bit. He talked about how his son, who's maybe 4 or 5 years old, doesn't understand what's going on. I mean, Julius got booed during the pregame lineup introductions, and that was kind of sad to hear. But Julius said, listen, it comes with the territory. This is New York City. As far as him saying that he wants to be here long term, I don't think anyone in the league is really buying it. Uh, he just, people around the league, as we reported, feel that he's acting up because of his desire to be traded this summer. And I think the Knicks have to think long and hard of it. I mean, I know they are. And the Knicks are wondering if Julius is the future or if Obi Toppin is the future as their starting power forward. And it was just sad last night to hear Julius talk. He was very candid, but do I believe him when he says that, he wants to be here long term? Not exactly. Uh, there was a WFAN thing that he already had asked for a trade after the Bulls game. He said completely not true. I didn't hear that either. I just know that people around the league are believing that Julius is acting out like a James Harden situation because he wants to be moved.
So many questions about Julius at this point, and I don't know if I've ever seen in all of my years as a Knicks fan a player who was beloved one season become the villain the next season. And I guess my question to you, Mark, is this: is what was the tipping point? At what point did Julius go from the hero to the villain?
Well, I will. It's a great question because I was stunned early in the season. Julius got off to a so-so start, and after that 5-1 start, the Knicks kind of dipped. And Julius was taking so much heat on social media. His three-point shooting was off. His defense wasn't as tenacious as last season, but it was surprising to me to hear the fans on talk radio and social media just destroy him and say, "Oh, we don't believe in Julius anymore. We got to trade him now." Julius thought he was well past that. And I think he was stunned and hurt that after what he did last season, all of a sudden the fickle fans turned on him. And he had a right to be a little upset. But the thumbs down gesture, you can't take that back. I mean, as much as Julius can say that he knows it comes with the territory, well, if he knows that, he wouldn't have done that at the Garden during the Knicks victory, uh, telling the fans and then afterwards explaining what the gesture meant in profane terms. So, as Walt Frazier said last night on the telecast, you know, Julius brought a lot of this on himself. And Walt also mentioned there's only two other players in the league averaging a 20, 10, and 5 Jokic and Giannis. So I think Julius has taken a little too much heat, but he has handled it so poorly.
Yep, yep, absolutely, gentlemen. Completely agree. Great question, EJ. And Mark, I will say you've been all over it in terms of the New York Post and, reporting his distant from the team, being in the locker room during warm-ups and things like that, asking these questions that, others may not be, comfortable asking as well. So, you've been seeing it as well as fans have as well, his distance, his behavior on the court. And the tipping point, recent time was after the Chicago game when the team won the game, fourth in a row, and Julius Randle looked dejected after the game, which is something I've never seen before. Turned his back on the team and walked towards the locker room, throwing the ball away as well. So that's just another example of exactly what you're saying.
Well, there's been so many incidents. If you remember on the West Coast trip, he got into it with an assistant coach. He's gotten into it with Rudy Gobert and Cam Johnson, referees. But one thing that I've reported, and I find it so bizarre, since the first West Coast trip, as you had alluded to, he stays in the back during the national anthem and then during pregame lineup introductions. They announce Julius Randle's name, and Julius is in the back. And in the last couple of this is only for road games. He during home games, he participates. And we wrote the story, and the source said that, well, this is his ritual now, superstition. He's warming up. This is a great way to loosen up without standing around. But these are pregame lineup traditional introductions, and after the introductions, the team huddles and hugs, and it's just so bizarre. And it's just a pattern, and I'm disturbed by it. And EJ, what do you think of that? Not joining the team for the national anthem. I don't think it's a political statement,
Mm-hmm.
but just being there for the starting lineup intros.
I don't know. I mean, I think that I think there's something there. There's something there. What is it? We don't know. And I think that's part of what's sad about the transformation or the devolution of Julius Randle is to have gone from a hero last season where, 7th Avenue shuts down because we win one playoff game, and to him becoming this ostracized, if he's ostracized himself or if he's decided I'm going to isolate myself. That's kind of sad, because I don't know if there are many teams that can withstand their best player or their highest player, because there is a difference between the two, choosing to isolate himself. So it's kind of scary. It's also scary because it's a young team, and you don't want your IQs, you don't want your Obi Toppins, your RJs to feel that sense of we're 14 players on this team, but that one other player doesn't feel that level of camaraderie. So it scares me because, again, is this season a byproduct of a fractured locker room? I don't know. And that's we don't need that. We don't want that for this team.
No, it's a great point. And we wrote even the other day that Randle's lack of leadership is blamed for part of this downfall. Tom Thibodeau was talking about Derrick Rose's rehab, and he was saying, even if he doesn't come back, the fact that he's attacking this rehab so hard and so diligently and so professionally, it rubs off on the younger players. They see Derrick Rose, even though the team is all but out of the playoff race, trying to get back into the lineup. And what a great example. And what kind of great example is Randle showing to Miles McBride and, as you said, IQ, even RJ Barrett. But I mean, CT, your thoughts on Randle's leadership when your best player is not a leader? I mean, your team is in trouble.
Yep, absolutely. And highest paid salary obviously as well, which is another added element. But I agree, Mark, and I feel like if I had to list some of the reasons, to EJ's earlier question as to what was the tipping point for Randle, I feel like we've spoken about, he wasn't happy with the off-season moves. He took a pay cut, and like you said, He feels like the criticism from the fans after a couple of poor performances triggered it like a snowball. Maybe his family subject to things on social media in New York as well. And with that said, I want to talk about his value because, there's been a lot of reports that Julius Randle, would have no value. Some executives around the league saying that he might be a sunken cost. I don't think that's true. I think Julius Randle is a good basketball player. And we see that on the West Coast. I think it's psychological, Mark, because when he plays against Dallas, he looks like a superstar out there. When he plays the LA Lakers, looks like a superstar. When he goes up against Domantas Sabonis, who is an all-star, he tends to dominate him as well. So, in terms of Randall's value, I have a couple of trade scenarios that I'd like to run across you. But yeah, what are your general thoughts, gentlemen, about Julius's value right now?
Well, he's definitely got value. He signed that contract extension. I don't like to call it a pay cut. I mean, he'll make $117 million, but he could have made more in unrestricted free agency, although the type of season he's had with all the weirdness that has occurred, maybe he would not have come close to the maximum salary. So I think he did a smart maneuver with the contract extension. But listen, when we talk to coaches before a game, they have to game plan for Julius Randle, and that's where the double teams are coming. They rave about Julius, and the question with Julius right now is his mind. It's not his talent. He's a terrific offensive player. I mean, defensively, listen, for a man his size, he should be a better rim protector. He should be a little more agile defensively and quicker. But offensively, he's a terrific defensive player, and he's a solid rebounder. So in terms of value, I think he's still 26, 27 years old. I think there's a lot of value there. Are they going to get an all-star? No, because right now Julius is not considered an all-star player, but they can get valuable pieces in a trade, and I think they're going to try.
Yep. Yeah, EJ, yeah, what are your thoughts on Randall's value? And did you have any, particular fit that you feel like, because there's a couple that I have.
CT, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. I think Julius is a easily top 40 player in the NBA, bar none. I think the question is he a top 20 player? And I think those are the players who make a team a championship contender. And so I think part of the frustration we've had with Julius this season is he's a really good player. He probably is our best player, arguably RJ. You can have the RJ Julius conversation, but maybe he has been miscast as a top 20 player when in reality he's more of a top 30, top 40 player. And given that we have to give Mitch a contract, perhaps, given that RJ's coming for an contract extension, I think the question of what we do with Julius is not just what Julius is in terms of being a top 40 player. It's also a question of the fit with RJ, the fit with a Mitch, and the forever need that we have with this point guard. I mean, the best point guard we've had is sitting in stylish suits, looking at his number in the rafters. So, I do think the criticism of Julius has been harsh this season, but I also think it's a reflection of what he isn't. He isn't LeBron. He isn't Giannis. He isn't Steph. He isn't Dame. But he's like that notch below. And I think we have to kind of angle to get those pieces to become a better piece. And Julius might be our best asset to get better assets for the future.
Right. Well, you invoked RJ Barrett. Is he a fit with Randle? As I think we've talked about this on the show, about both left-handers. Neither are great three-point shooters at all. Both drive like bulls to the basket. They're very similar, and can they coexist? The analytics show that Julius is actually better when RJ's off the court. RJ is actually better when Julius is off the court. So that's an issue. And that's why the Knicks, Leon Rose has to realize, is this a chemistry fit? And we have speculated maybe some of Julius's anger or just weird behavior results from jealousy about RJ becoming the face of the franchise, the fan favorite, the guy whose name is chanted at the Garden and on the road. RJ Barrett chants resound when we're in the South. It's amazing. and sometimes when Julius is playing better than RJ. And I think he's only human. And I think he's like, wow, I used to get those chants last year, at least MVP chants, and now nothing.
Yep, yep. And just going back to what I was saying, I feel like there's a couple situations out west, gentlemen. Portland Trailblazers have potentially the 2 first-round picks in the top 10 with Damian Lillard and trying to build around him. I feel like Dallas, I think you've got to explore that opportunity. There's obviously the Jalen Brunson talk. The San Antonio Spurs, also in Texas, and the OKC Thunder have a lot of guards as well. Do you see a nice fit out there, Mark?
I mean, point guard is just the key. EJ alluded to it. They come into the season with Kemba Walker and Derrick Rose, and one of the biggest disasters in Knicks history regarding their point guard situation. Playing Alec Burks, who's a nice wing scorer, probably off the bench, thrust into a role that he is just not equipped to handle as the starting point guard. The offseason will be about getting a bona fide point guard. They had all that cap space and a lot of point guard options. So in a trade for Randle, people around the league expect the Knicks to either to try to get a center to replace Mitchell Robinson if they lose him, or a point guard. And maybe there can be a sign and trade with the Mavericks. We know that Randle loves playing in Dallas, his hometown. I think he was on the court in Dallas when he was having his big night last month or earlier this month. He was like, "This is my gym." I think he would love to play for the Mavericks. Does Mark Cuban think he's a winning player? I mean, this is a winning franchise in Dallas, but they could use him. I mean, Porzingis no longer is there. They got Dinwiddie, who's a good fit, and I think that Jalen Brunson is on the move. So who knows, a sign and trade with Brunson and Randle being part of it. I know Mitchell Robinson has eyes on Dallas too. He has lived in the off season in Dallas a couple of years. So it would be so interesting to see how Leon handles this. But I think odds are Julius won't be a Knick next season.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Mark. I think, we've had conversations on the show before about our thoughts on Mitch, what we should do with Mitch. I think, again, the Julius slander has been difficult this year, but it's also like when we look at the fourth quarter and we see Alec Burks on the floor and he's our point guard, that says a lot about our season this year. That says so much about where we are as an organization. And so even the question of re-signing Mitch, it's hard to evaluate what Mitch is if we don't have a proper point guard. It's hard to evaluate, what RJ is going to be if we don't have a proper point guard. And, when I look at Mitch, RJ, and Julius on the floor, at some point you just see that lane just start to get clogged in the middle. And it's like, man, so many of our plays become stagnant. And it's really like Julius and how we've criticized him, we should also be criticizing the front office because they didn't place him in the best position possible. And if he's going to get traded, I pray and I hope, if it's to Portland, if it's to OKC, if it's to Dallas, that there's some sort of point guard that we can rely on and say, this is clearly our point guard. We need to stop with this, bottom of the barrel, Filene's basement kind of point guard search. We need something that can solidly say, okay, this is our point guard. Even if it's not going to be an all-star, it's a serviceable point guard. We need that.
And listen, with Derrick Rose, you could use the excuse, well, he's missed most of the season, but that's not a shock. The guy has had multiple surgeries, and he's 33 years old. He's going to be just another year older next year. You can't rely on him to stay healthy. He's a backup point guard right now. That's the best you could do with Derrick, and in limited minutes, at most 20. So, listen, you could make the case that Quickly has shown some potential, but as a starting point guard playing 35 minutes a night or 33 minutes a night, I really don't see it.
Yep. And segue to point guard. There's some point guards in this NBA draft coming up. Mark, we spoke about it briefly before, but the tournament, is obviously almost over. There's a I did a breakdown on an intriguing international prospect, the Dominican guard, John Montero, as well. Have you been hearing about, the Knicks scouts getting busy? What have you been hearing?
Well, we should mention one international point guard that actually is a Knick, Rokas Jakubaitis. I probably mispronounced his name. Lithuanian, playing for Barcelona, doing very well. Left-hander, good ball handler, pretty good three-point shooter. I think they're going to try to bring him in. But again, he's so young, has to adapt to the speed of the NBA. But yeah, in the draft, they'll be looking for a point guard. They'll be looking for a center. But we'll see where they land in the lottery. Jaden Ivey is more combo guard than point guard, but he's a very, very hot prospect. Didn't look great against St. Peter's in their loss, Purdue's loss to St. Peter's. But, he's a young player. I can't imagine the Knicks getting up to 4 or 5. They're not going to have great lottery odds, especially after that 4-game winning streak. But point guard has to be a big target in the draft, as well as a center. They need a stretch 5. As you know, every single center on their roster cannot even shoot a mid-range jumper. Well, Taj Gibson has improved his three-point shooting, but obviously Mitchell and Noel and Jericho Sims, they're just not shooters. And in this NBA of pace and space, I mean, the Knicks have a bunch of old school pivots, and they got to add to that roster.
So what was the plan last season? I mean, in terms of drafting Jericho Sims and then restyling Nerlens Noel, it seems as if there was no forethought. Okay, we have a Nerlens Noel in Mitchell Robinson. We have a redundant piece with a Taj Gibson. Jericho Sims can be a project, but it's almost as if we set ourselves into this position where we wanted to be 500 or 500-esque and not really push for player development, or not really push to be a better team for this season, because there were so many hoping this piece can be better, hoping this piece can stay healthy, as opposed to really investing into solid pieces that we would know would be good for the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, well, Thibodeau loves centers who can protect the rim. And Noel played out of his mind, but he was in his contract year. His history has been injury prone. And, I've done a story about his work ethic, never been great. And this year was just a disaster for him. But listen, Jericho was the 58th pick in the draft. To find a player that you may be able to put in your rotation at 58 is pretty good. I'm not going to rip them for that, but not having a stretch 5, Randle was shooting over 40% from 3, and Toppin they were hoping would improve, but Randle regressed. Toppin is still, although the other night he hit some 3-pointers, but he's an erratic 3-point shooter. There's no big man who could really shoot the 3, and it's a real void on the roster. And they did add Evan Fournier, so they thought the 3-point shooting would improve there, and it did, as he breaks John Stark's record. But you need big men who could shoot the 3-pointer in this NBA, and the Knicks do not have one.
Yep, absolutely. It shapes up to be a huge offseason, like we spoke about, Mark. Really look forward to talking to you more about it. And your latest newsletter just dropped as well. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there are a few items, but my main theme was, as we look at this next roster and we do rip Leon Rose for not upgrading, the Eastern Conference lived up to the hype. I mean, in the offseason, everyone was telling me, hey, the Knicks, they didn't do bad in the offseason. They added some pieces, but the rest of the East, look out. And sure enough, there were 6 teams that just flew by the Knicks, including last night's opponent in Charlotte, obviously the Bulls. The Heat added Kyle Lowry, while the Knicks added Kemba Walker. The Cleveland Cavaliers with Mobley in the draft, and Garland, becoming an all-star. So part of this Knicks fall is because the East got real better. And then the team they played Sunday, Detroit, they have a host of young pieces that could be real good next season. Bagley trade could be a major steal. He's a restricted free agent. They're going to re-sign him. He looks like he could, live up to that number 2 pick from 2018. So here's another team behind the Knicks that looks like they could have a more promising future. And not to be the Debbie Downer, but Leon has a tall task and a very tough conference. As you know, their record would be 9th seed in the West.
Yeah, and EJ, in a team with one building block so far, RJ Barrett, all things are on the table for me this off season. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think I want to win a championship. All of my favorite teams, the Giants have won a championship in my lifetime. The Yankees have won multiple championships in my lifetime. And even the Rangers have won a championship in my lifetime. The only team I've never seen win a championship are the New York Knicks. And I think my fear is, does the organization want to be relevant, or does it want to be championship contenders? And, I'm praying and hoping that this offseason moves are made that are driven by the desire to win a championship, multiple championships. I think we're a little bit too eager to make the big swing trades as opposed to building organically in terms of, drafting well, then, making cagey strategic signings and then making that trade. My fear is that we're still stuck in that 2010 LeBron model where it's like, hope for that the superstar comes and then everything else will fall into place. And we forget that LeBron had Dwayne Wade right there in Miami. And so I'm hoping that this offseason we decide, are we rebuilding or are we trying to really just create a solid core so that we can move to that point of being a championship contender in the next few years? That's really my hope.
And tonight, the championship drought could officially continue. If Atlanta wins, the Knicks are officially out of any postseason. 1973, the last title, will soon be hitting 50 years of no championship for the New York Knicks.
Yep. Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And also, I will say, Mark, you wrote a great piece on future potential president or GMs, front office replacements as well. So I encourage everyone to check that out. There's a few, I think, that are doing well out in Memphis as well. And Toronto have a couple of nice, up and coming executives.
Yeah, well, Zach Kleiman might win the executive of the year. He runs Memphis. The Knicks would have to give draft compensation if they could steal Zach from Memphis. He's really done a terrific job building that franchise around Ja Morant. But there's others out there. I mean, guys with long-term experience as scouts and running a draft and just being real basketball men, not agents. The Knicks are run by 2 agents right now, and Leon Rose and William Wesley. And you could talk about their relationships around the league. Well, that hasn't panned out. And the pie in the sky is their relationship with Donovan Mitchell. Who knows? I know Donovan, as you know, from Westchester, and he made some comments the other night about his frustration in Utah. And I know he spends his off seasons here in New York. I met him in Queens in September. He attended a Naomi Osaka charity event. So I know that the Knicks have kind of been on his radar his whole life. But to pull off that trade would be he's not a free agent. They would have to put together some heck of a package to get Donovan. And I don't know if they have the pieces after a season like this.
Yep, no, absolutely. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure, and EJ, appreciate you as always sharing this conversation. Everyone follow these gentlemen on Twitter, and Mark, doing great work this season as always with the New York Post. Great work with the latest newsletter. Everyone check that out, and keep asking those hard questions as well, because you're on the money. And let's do it again soon, and be well.
Thanks, CT, EJ. Always have a great time. You guys really insightful questions and commentary, and keep up the good work.
Thanks so much, guys.
Yep. Appreciate it, everyone watching. And if you like this show, please hit the like button, and we'll see you again soon.